the session on valuing water and the role of pricing.
Very good. Thank you, Iris.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Great.
Very good. Very good. And very good to see everybody. I actually was in last year's Stockholm World Water Week Valuing Water session for 2 minutes. So the link actually got me back to the Portable platform. But it's very good to see you all. It's great to have so many people joining us online. In the first week of Stockholm World Water Week online, and next week I hope I will see many of you actually in Stockholm, but perhaps also virtually. Thanks very much. Not sure what Iris already told you, but you're part of session 1 of the seminar, all dedicated to valuing water and what it means putting a price on water or not, and how complex that is over time, now and towards the future, knowing, and I don't know who of you all are from Europe or of other parts of the planet where water is becoming more scarce, more polluted, and more contested because of the different interests that all overlap. Today, we have session number 1 in the Valuing Water sequence of 3 events. My name is Henk Ovink. I'm Special Envoy for International Water Affairs, and I have the honor to moderate this session. Welcome also to the speakers that we have. Iris Bijlsma, you already heard her. She's the lead of the Valuing Water Initiative, the Valuing Water Initiative that came out of the high-level panel on water, a panel that served the world, you could say, between 2016 and 2018, putting water high on the political as well as the societal agenda, with 11 heads of state, heads of government, the Secretary General of the UN, and the President of the World Bank. The panel resulted in a report, but also in many follow-up actions. One of them actually is next year's UN 2023 Water Conference, co-hosted by the governments of Tajikistan and the Netherlands. But also a main outcome of that high-level panel on water was the Valuing Water Initiative. So Iris, thanks for joining us here, and you will tell us much more about that. Also great to have Kirsten James with us, Senior Program Director at Ceres on water. And Kirsten has been with us also from the beginning when it came to valuing water and the Valuing Water Initiative. Also before that, but definitely within that journey. So Kirsten will talk about Ceres and the initiative Ceres is taking with its members across the world to value water and put the valuing water in a totally different condition. So we will start there with the explanation, and then we have a panel. Happy to have the panel participants, and you can all see them also now online. Madhu Varghese, Senior Director for Water and Agriculture at Coca-Cola. Madhu, great to have you with us. Belena Negash, ESG Manager at the South Africa Government Employees Pension Fund. And I think you're now working hard on your PhD, or I read, so look forward to hear from you, of course. And Nadja Fransen, Sustainability Specialist at Actiam. And all 3 of you will tell more about what you come across when we're thinking and talking about valuing water. We want to learn and understand better what valuing water means. What is the difference between when you talk about valuing water? Yeah, we have principles, we have to protect our resources, we have to include everybody, we have to step up our actions, become more bold and innovative, invest where we need to invest, look at it holistically, so take into account every aspect. So we know the principles, but what is in practice the real difference between a valuing water approach and going by price? A small, single focus, too often financial economic perspective. And we see the destructive nature of going single focused. Every investment we made in the past in the context of providing answers to solutions that now have a spillover negative impact in our society, on nature, on our environment, on our health, but also on our security. Taking a valuing water approach will really benefit not only water security, but because water security, security for all, and will trickle down across every sustainable development goal. So understanding what this means and how that could work, but also positioning pricing water within that context. Because with water being a human right, putting a price on a drop of water, of course, is very complex, or in some countries and regions forbidden or culturally complex. While at the same time, when we don't price water or water-related resources, the most vulnerable, including our environment, suffer first and foremost. So there is a disconnect between the discussion on putting a price on water and what it actually means in the context of valuing water. And of course, this is not something alone for sectors and silos in society, but also the financial sector. It is a broader societal debate. So of course, valuing water goes beyond pricing, but there is a reason. We want to raise your awareness, but also get your attention to what this really means, valuing water in the context of moving towards next year's UN 2023 conference. The first UN conference in 46 years, the second in the history of the UN. Now, conferences don't change the world, I know, but they can be mechanisms to have us focus on water as a mechanism, a lever, a change maker, but also get the commitments from all across society to ensure that we scale and replicate what works and stop what actually prevents us from succeeding. And I see the conference as being the lead on one of the co-hosts from the Netherlands, as a real opportunity to bring the world together. So not the water world, but the world together on water, to make sure that that value of water is understood, and that working on water and investing in water, collaborating on water, coming together on the issues of water and valuing water in its best way possible can be a driving force for the sustainable development scale up that we so much need. So look forward to hear more from you. And of course, the panel. I will stop here because I'm only to give the introduction, and I want to hand over to Iris. Iris to tell us more on the Valuing Water Initiative and help us get into the discussion before we move to Kirsten to talk about the finance sector aspect of it. Iris, the floor is yours.
Thank you for giving me the word, and thank you. It's an honor to be here today. My name is Iris Bijlsma. I'm the program lead of the Valuing Water Initiative, just as Henk already said. Next slide, please. And I am here to introduce a little bit our program and the Valuing Water Initiative, but also what we are doing. Henk already mentioned the high-level panel on water in 2016, where different head of states came together. And 2 years after that, they released a document called Making Every Drop Counts. And in that, they defined also the Valuing Water principles, 5 of them. And the Valuing Water Initiative is there to practically apply those 5 principles that you can now also see on, at the screen, and across different contexts, sectors, and geographies. And I do want to mention those 5 principles because I think they're very important. The first one is to recognize and embrace water's multiple values, just like Henk said, not only the monetary value, but also the social, cultural, and environmental value of water. Second principle is to reconcile values and build trust. This is not an easy one to do, but a very important one to do, and to reconcile those different values to make decisions more equitable, transparent, and inclusive. The third one is to protect the sources. We have the obligation to protect our water sources, and we have the obligation to educate, to empower. So education and awareness about the intrinsic value of water, but also about its essential role in all aspects of our lives. And the fifth, last but not least, to invest and innovate. We have to make sure that investments are adequately done and that water risks are known and also mitigated or reduced. So those are the 5 Valuing Water principles that the Valuing Water Initiative, with all the partners that we have, are trying to implement. Next slide, please. And why we do it is to, of course, achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, to make better decisions that impact water. And we're trying to do that by including those multiple values of water, and to recognize and reconcile those multiple values, and also consider the different dynamics of the wider system in which water is the enabler. Next slide, please. So I would like to point out the United Nations World Water Development Report of 2021, which is focused on valuing water. A very good report, but also a nice quote that that's in there on pricing. So why do we focus on pricing? I would like to quote the following. Where water is priced, meaning consumers are charged for using it, the price often reflects attempts for cost recovery and not the value delivered. So this is important, but we have to focus on the value delivered on water. Traditional economic accounting, often a key means of informing policy decisions at this moment, tends to limit water values to using the recorded price or cost of water when economic transactions occur. We have to look at water broader, in a broader context of valuing water, and not only also including pricing, but also making it more broader. Next slide, please. So, but there is a challenge. Right? It has been proven difficult to determine the true value of water because it carries multiple values and benefits. So we cannot confuse the concepts of price, cost, and value. So price and cost normally are quantifiable, and the concept of value is much wider. So it really includes social, cultural, environmental, and all the other values that are related to water, which are not always quantifiable. This makes it difficult. But when you look only at monetary valuation of water, it presents the disadvantage of the underestimating or maybe even excluding those other aspects that are more difficult to monetize. This also has as a consequence that it is normally the true value of water is not often reflected appropriately enough in political and financial decision making. Now, where do we stand now? Next slide, please. Is to focus on a more inclusive, transparent, and equitable decision-making when it comes to water, and also when it comes to pricing water. So we have to take into account the recognition and reconciliation of those multiple values. And we have to think of water in its broader system of valuing water. We have to think of the pricing of water in that broader system of valuing water. And to be honest, we have to step up our game. Everyone has to step up your game when it comes to valuing water in policy, practice, behavior, and also finance. You know, we already placed valuing water on the agenda in the finance sector and in other sectors as well, among others through the Valuing Water Finance Initiative, where Kirsten will talk about later on. We are doing our best, but everybody that's also here in this call should step up their game to value water better. Next slide, please. We have a program within the Valuing Water Initiative focused on the financial sector, which includes topics such as materiality, transparency, and disclosure. We do that with Ceres, now present, but CDP as well, Water Footprint Network, and Mercer. And as Henk already said, we are working towards the UN 2023 Water Conference next year and the Water Action Agenda, but also beyond. And I think we collectively have to do so. But I first would like to give you more details on what we are doing within the financial sector and the Valuing Water Finance Initiative. So I'd like to give the word to Kirsten, who will take you further into more detail on that initiative. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Henk and Iris, for setting the discussion so well today. And good morning, everyone from Los Angeles. So as Iris said, I want to share a little bit more about what Ceres has been doing for the last decade or more in the finance sector, and also share information about the Valuing Water Finance Initiative, which was referenced. So if you could go to the next slide, please. For more than a decade now, Ceres has worked with influential institutional investors, Fortune 500 companies, and nonprofit organizations to address the global water crisis. We've recognized that there's a critical need to shift how our capital markets value water if there's really any chance of achieving a clean, accessible, and sustainable water supply for all. And about over the past 7 years or so, Ceres has really expanded its focus on institutional investors as we continue to see water risk play out in real time and impact the financial performance of a range of industries and a range of geographies. And to scale the impact of this work in partnership with colleagues at the government of the Netherlands, we have just launched a new global investor-led initiative, which we call the Valuing Water Finance Initiative, which I'll share a little bit more about over the next few minutes. The next slide, please. As we are all acutely aware on this call today, we are seeing the impacts of the water crisis all around us. On the slide, we see headlines from across the world where communities and businesses are feeling the impact of poorly managed water resources. Every day you pick up the newspaper and this is playing out in real time. Next slide, please. There really isn't a company on earth that can operate without water. The global water crisis is systemic, it's far-reaching, it's a financial risk for all economies. And there's no shortage of headlines or statistics to really emphasize this point. Some of these statistics are shown here on this slide. For example, a Ceres analysis a few years back found that over 50% of the stocks in 4 major indices are in industries of medium to high water risk. Time is running out, but we have the power to change the tide. The next slide, please. So with the Valuing Water Finance Initiative, we have our sights on this vision, where companies will recognize fresh water as the world's most precious natural resource, essential to whole industries and all communities and ecosystems. By sustainably managing water use, eliminating point and non-point pollution, taking collective action, adopting good governance practices, and supporting the human right to water, companies will achieve sustainable water management. Next slide, please. So over the past 2 years, we've worked with many key stakeholders to create momentum for this initiative and really build a solid foundation for the financial community to better understand the value of water. So now we are at the phase of driving the on-the-ground change to achieve our shared vision, where we have a large tent of institutional investors who will engage with the companies they own and really work with them to better value and act on water as a financial risk and drive the necessary large-scale change to better protect water systems. So over the next few slides, I'd like to briefly highlight some of the key elements that have really helped us reach this point and this important milestone today. Next slide. So over the past 2 years, we've collaborated with the Global Institute of Water Security and a group of leading scientists to fill an important gap in the research to really ensure that investors are compelled to act, being motivated by the scientific case for action. Of course, there is a lot of wonderful scientific research and academic research out there. Many of you on the call are probably very involved in this, that details the threat of the water crisis. However, we found that the information wasn't really compiled and articulated in a way that would resonate with the financial industry. So through this science-based synthesis of the global evidence of industrial water impacts, which was released earlier this year, through this report, we've identified industries having the most severe and systemic impacts of water, and it also identifies critical and emerging threats to water resources. And again, this is framed in a way that we believe will resonate with the financial community. So I encourage you all to access this report on our website. Next slide, please. So here the slide just shows the 7 key industrial sectors with the most severe and systemic impacts on water, which were identified through the research and are listed here. Next slide. The second piece of foundational research that was conducted was a set of materiality briefs. So the reasoning behind developing these briefs is that really in order for institutional investors to prioritize water, we need to really build out that business case for water. So we did this, developing 2 financial materiality briefs, focusing on the value at risk from water externalities in the packaged meat and apparel sectors. And we hope that this work can also translate to other sectors as well. But for this, we focused on the meat and apparel sectors. So this was released late last year. Back one slide, please. Was released late last year in partnership with DWS, S&P Global, and Blue Risk. And it really marked the first of its kind corporate valuation methodology that incorporates the true costs of water waste and pollution impacts to companies in these two sectors. The analysis found the cost of addressing harmful water impacts could lead to a change in company valuation of up to -47% and top nearly 1.8 billion annually for some of the firms analyzed. The briefs clearly show the double materiality investors are facing in regards to impacts to water resources. And the analysis also, I believe, demonstrated that there is sufficient information to estimate the magnitude of water-related externalities. Next slide, please. And lastly, building from that scientific evidence previously mentioned and the business case that I just mentioned, the Valuing Water Finance Initiative, in partnership with our investor partners and many other stakeholders, has also developed another key tool for investors to successfully engage with companies around water risk. So we had received feedback and in speaking with many of our investor partners that there really wasn't that clear, concise guidepost or framework for water, similar to what exists on climate when investors are engaging with companies around water risk. So what we developed, calling them the corporate expectations for valuing water, we've really developed this framework or playbook that investors need to effectively begin these conversations and really hone in on the important pieces of work to help move and collaborate with companies on water resource management. So as you can see here, the expectations clearly outline action steps for companies in the area of water quantity, water quality, ecosystem protection, access to water and sanitation, board oversight, and public policy engagement. And there's a variety of indicators and metrics behind each of these 6 pillars. Next slide. And of course, partners have been absolutely critical in this effort leading up to the launch of the initiative. And of course, as we look forward into ensuring that we reach our vision. So listed here, the Valuing Water Finance Task Force members have identified the importance of water for their institutions and their investments and have committed support to this initiative and serve as the advisory body moving forward in this work. Next slide. So what are investor signatories to the Valuing Water Finance Initiative really committing to? Well, here you see the signatory statement where investors that are signing on are poised to engage with portfolio companies around the corporate expectations for valuing water. And I think it's important to note that, investors will really be meeting companies where they are on their water journey. Some, like those we'll hear from later today and at other sessions in World Water Week, are doing really good work and are much further along than others. So this initiative will really help lift all boats. And investors will look to better understand, companies' challenges around water stewardship and really work together towards solutions. And on this next slide, I'm pleased to share the 64 founding signatories representing nearly 10 trillion in assets under management. And this group of global asset owners and managers represents 15 countries, 5 continents, a variety of different institutional investors, but they're united in their purpose to work with companies in the coming months and years to really help realize the large-scale change that is needed to protect our water systems. So with that overview of the Valuing Water Finance Initiative, I'm pleased to turn to our panelists to help us further explore how financial institutions and the private sector are thinking about and acting on the value of water. There's a lot of great work being done, and we'll hear more about that today. So each panelist is going to help us first set the stage a little bit with an overview of themselves, their efforts generally, and then we'll have a bit of a panel discussion that dives into the topic more deeply. So I'll first turn it over to Nadia Franson, who's the responsible investment officer with Actium. Nadia, over to you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Hi, everyone. Maybe first to introduce Actium. Actium is an asset manager in the Netherlands. Our main clients are currently insurance companies in the Netherlands. And since the beginning of this year, we are part of the Cardano group. Our main focus is to offer sustainable investment solutions to our clients. And with that, we basically have two requirements on companies that we allow into our investment portfolio. First of all, the company should not cross the social foundations of our society. So everybody should have a decent means of living, and companies, we believe, should not interfere with these rights. A second requirement we pose to companies is that they act within the planetary boundaries of the Stockholm Resilience Institute. So water is one of the 7 priority themes that we have selected for our investment funds. It touches upon both of these requirements. On the one hand, water is a basic human right, but on the other hand, it's also one of the planetary boundaries that we are depending on for our environment, but also for our lives. So we believe currently the timing is right, because as already mentioned by Henk, but also by Kirsten, currently you see situations of drought all over the world. So in Italy, the risotto harvest is being threatened. In Mexico, the president proposed a ban on beer production in the northern part of the country. Factories in China have been shutting down as hydropower reservoirs ran low. So it's really an issue everywhere. And at Actium, we believe on the one hand, as an investor, you would not want your investments to cause these kind of harm to human health and the environment. So it's really an ethical thing. But on the other hand, it also constitutes a real financially material risk to our investment portfolio. And this risk is only becoming bigger as situations of water scarcity, but also water pollution are increasingly part of our society and affecting companies. So therefore, at Actium, we believe that how a company manages its water risk should be an integral part of our investment considerations. And it's something that we take into account in building our portfolio. So that's on the one hand, the negative, the risk side, so to say. But on the other hand, I would also want to touch upon the possibilities to add a positive contribution. Because it could be financially attractive to invest in those companies that provide solutions to the water crisis. So as the water crisis becomes more and more severe, there will be more pressure upon companies to act, to increase their water efficiency, and to also find alternative ways of productions that require less water, cause less pollution. And the products and services that facilitate these developments will be increasingly in demand. So within Actium, besides looking really at how companies manage their water risk, we also have a portfolio that is really focused on how companies positively contribute to the SDGs, but also as one of the SDGs on water. And this portfolio contains, for example, companies like Xylem, which have really positive effect on water resources. And with this, on the one hand, we try to stimulate the development of products and services that can help companies achieve their water reduction and watershed protection goals. But also simultaneously, we would want to generate attractive returns with this portfolio. So yeah, in terms of setting the scene, I think for investors, it's really part of both their risk management, but also finding opportunities and helping generate attractive investment returns.
Great. Thank you, Nadia. That's a really helpful overview. So now let's turn to Belena Nagash, the ESG manager at the Government Employees Pension Fund of South Africa.
Thank you. So my name is Belena Nagash. I'm the ESG manager at the Government Employees Pension Fund. We manage about 2.1 trillion rands of member funds. We are a defined benefit fund, and we have about 1.2 million members. So we are a significant provider of financial capital and a huge institutional investor in the South African economy. We constitute about just over almost 35% of the South African GDP. So, you know, that just kind of gives you context on how large we are within South Africa. We're also the largest pension fund in Africa. So we understand that we play an important role in shaping, you know, this transformation towards a more sustainable economy, and of course, the African continent. We started our sustainability journey back in 2006 when we became a founding member of the UNPRI. And in living out this commitment, we, you know, follow an investment philosophy and ownership practices that we take ESG into account. So that's just the broader umbrella kind of thinking of why we are so interested in water. But bringing it down, further down into water, we back in 2012, we partnered with WWF, and we published an empirical study called Navigating Muddy Waters, just in highlighting how responsible investing for climate change and water in the South African context. So that was really just the beginning of, wow, you know, we understand that we are in a water-stressed country, and we especially vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. But what does this actually mean? What does this mean on a portfolio level? And especially as a long-term investor and a defined benefit fund, you know, we have to take into account the risks which our investee companies are facing. And then we realized that actually in not doing that, it would actually mean that we're not meeting our fiduciary obligations, because from a pension fund perspective, you have to ensure that you are taking into account all the risks that that the portfolio is meeting with. So not only is it a morally right thing to do, but it is also an obligation for us. And that is why investors such as ourselves have a strong vested interest in climate-related risks. Fast forward to today, we also now see that the World Economic Forum, you know, does annually publish the top 10 risks, and 5 of those risks happen to be related to environmental risks. So for investors such as us, the issue of water scarcity presents both a portfolio risk and a socioeconomic risks. We see, you know, more and more frequent water shortages, extreme climate change impacts. And so we have to understand how that impacts our portfolio holdings. And of course, as a large investor such as ourselves, we are able to also take active ownership strategies such as, you know, proxy voting, engaging companies. And from 2006 to 2012, I do believe that we've made great strides in understanding what our risks are. Do we fully 100% understand it? And can we quantify it? At this stage, this is why we are part of the Valuing Water Task Force, because we want to do not just the morally right thing to do, but also the right thing to do as an investor. And of course, we're doing that within the context of our world in South Africa, where there's multidimensional levels of poverty, unemployment, large levels of inequality. And I think National Treasury, I think it was last year, came up with a paper to say that to achieve water scarcity in South Africa, we need an estimated capital funding of about 33 billion rand per year for the next 10 years. So that is the world that we are in, you know, and of course we have to take into account not just the environmental aspects, but also the social impacts of that as well. So that's me from my side. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, and we'll be diving into some of those points a little bit more, especially that last point. Thank you so much for that context. And then I'd like to turn it over to our final panelist, Madhu with the Coca-Cola Company. Madhu.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here with all of you today and listening to some of my fellow panelists. I think from our perspective at the Coca-Cola Company, we've had a long-standing commitment to water. We recognize that water is essential to every person and every ecosystem in the world. And for us, it's very essential to our products that we make and for the agricultural ingredients that we use in our products. So for over a decade, we worked together with our bottling partners to set an example in shared water management practices. In 2007 was when we set a pioneering goal, which was to replenish all the water that we use in our finished beverages, to replenish that to nature and communities. And following the goal that was set in 2007, in 2015, we achieved this goal 5 years ahead of schedule. And we've done that every year since then in terms of replenishing 100% of the water used in our finished beverages. Last year in 2021, we actually replenished 167% of the water we use in our finished beverages to nature and communities. At the same time, we've also been looking at water use efficiency in our operations, and currently we use 1.81 liters of water for every liter of product that we produce, and that's a 20% improvement compared to 2010 baseline. We know and we recognize that while we made significant progress, we must acknowledge that we need to take greater action to protect the water resources that we share with the ecosystems and communities we operate in. And so in that spirit, last year, we launched our 2030 water security strategy, which has a vision of increasing water security where we operate, where we sell our products, and we source our ingredients, and we touch people's lives. Our 2030 water strategy is based on science and with developed with extensive stakeholder input, as well as a deep analysis of shared water risks that we face in our business and supply chain. When we were setting the water strategy, we looked at 3 pillars and set goals for 2030 across all 3 pillars of our operations, our communities, and our watersheds. In addition to specific goals for each of these 3 pillars, we also maintained our commitment of having at least 100% global replenishment of the water that we use in our finished beverages. The strategy also emphasizes some cross-cutting themes like gender and resilience, because first of all, we recognize that women and girls are disproportionately impacted by water issues, and also because we know that water is at the nexus of all our priority ESG issues. Before I finish the section, I would just like to share one example of how we demonstrate value of water to our company and our bottling partners. I come from India, so I'll speak about India because that's close to my heart. But in India, we know that disruption in the supply of available fresh water can create challenges across our value chain. And like many Indian communities and other economic actors, we also know that our business is dependent on access to water. Given the persistent water challenges that the country faces, we've long acknowledged the need to be a part of the solution to address local water scarcity and quality issues both. And for this reason, building climate resilience into our water strategy, including replenishment, including improvements in the efficiency of water usage, and source water assessments is really critical for us in addressing water stress as a business risk. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that context. So with that overview, I'd like to turn it in to the panel discussion for a deeper dive into some of these topics. So Belena, first turning to you, you highlighted this in your opening remarks, and several of the speakers, including myself, really highlighted the water crisis playing out around the globe, as will be a theme throughout this conference, I'm sure. So I think it's important to highlight that, in your home country and in a region in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa, we're, seeing headlines, throughout the world about this area nearing day zero, where parts of the city could soon be without water. So that's just one of the many examples of the water crisis playing out close to home. So as the largest pension fund in Africa, how do these really current localized impacts of the water crisis factor into your approach and decision making?
Sure. Thank you for your question. Firstly, the GPF recognizes that water is a human rights issue. And as Madhu did mention that, it does affect women and girls disproportionately. However, from the GPF's perspective, we have, as part of our broader responsible investing approach, have always taken water issues into account. So when we are engaging investee companies, both for listed and unlisted side, water is always, or environmental issues always come up in the conversation. If it's an extractive business, how are you looking at your water usage? How are you impacting the communities? Are you impacting the communities negatively that they don't have access to water anymore? What is the quality of your water? What is your water strategy? And that is the type of engagements that we've had for many, many years. So for the GPF, it's not a new topic, but it's certainly very pleasing to see that now it's actually an agenda. It's something that, we see in conferences talk about water. We're seeing it in the news. So that, I think from a GPF perspective, that's great. Also on the unlisted side, of course, in private equity, you have more of a say. The GPF always aims to be a larger investor, and we often are. So, we have room and we have the muscle to kind of effect change. And one of the greatest things that we've been doing for over a decade now is ensuring not just water, but other social factors being set on contracting stage. So, we will sit with the investee company, through our asset manager, and we will say, these are the issues that we have identified, and we would like to see action plans. And so the great thing is that once you exit that fund or that investee company, you actually see an ESG improvement. So that is basically how, on the unlisted side, we try and effect change. And then also on the listed side, we also have continued engagements as well with board members and, audit and risk committees.
Great. That's really interesting to hear. And I'm wondering if you could share just a little bit more and maybe just, diving in more to sort of that social dimension of water, how you believe, your peer investors should be thinking about the value of water from this perspective. Are there any sort of lessons learned from the work you just shared that, they could learn from? And, just particularly curious about how you operationalize the understanding of these multiple political, economic, and social considerations related to water in your, policies and stewardship approach. Any additional color you can share there?
Sure. I think, I have to speak quite frankly and say, you can't really achieve purity. And I think in the investment world, we try to, paint everything to say, yay, it's green, we're doing all the great things. However, you are trying to, I'll speak frankly, as I just said. So we've got a solar plant that we have invested in a very rural, very super hot region in South Africa. And so off I go, and I see all these solar panels. Oh, it's great, it's amazing. But hang on, how do you make solar panels? That does require water. So in a country like South Africa, where we have energy insecurity, we also, we struggle with daily, they call it load shedding in South Africa, where, you don't have energy, you don't have power. At the same time, we are about, I think, over 80% reliant on coal, which also uses water, and we've also got high levels of unemployment. So, and that's what, I guess the point that I'm trying to drive is you don't really, reach purity, because on the one side, you're trying to, produce clean energy, but clean energy also requires some level of water. But what you can do is engage that investee company and say, how are you using the water? Of course, to put up solar panels, it's a very hot, arid, a water scarce region. So how are you utilizing that water? When do you produce any kinds of, forgot the word, like backwash, I forgot the word, but there's a specific term for it that escapes me right now. So what is your environmental and water management system like? So, that is the type of conversations that you need to have, and try and be realistic as well. Within your context, within your economy, what is the type of conversation that you can have? And I think that is very important from an investor perspective.
Great. Yeah, no, that's a really interesting case study. Investors need to ask those important questions of the companies. All right, terrific. Well, I'm going to turn to you, Nadia, because I'm curious. I think you mentioned in your context setting that Actiam has set objectives for various sustainability themes within its investment portfolio. And one of these objectives is to achieve a water neutral investment portfolio by 2030. So could you explain a little bit more about what exactly does that mean to have a water neutral investment portfolio? How do you measure and assess, what investments are in fact water neutral? And then, in the theme of this conversation today, how does your work consider the multiple values of water?
So we indeed have the aim of having a water neutral investment portfolio in 2030. The official definition of a water neutral investment portfolio for us is that the portfolio companies that we invest in that are active in water stressed areas consume no more water than nature can replenish and cause no more pollution than is acceptable for human health and natural ecosystems. So in this, I kind of want to echo Belena. So you will never be able to go down fully to zero water use. But we would like to see that companies that are using water within the limits of the environment they operate in. So to measure progress on this, we calculate a water footprint of our portfolio. And for this, we take the companies that are active in high risk sectors, so sectors that use generally a lot of water. And for these companies, we take the water consumption in water stressed areas. So basically what we do is we take the total water consumptions by those companies, and we multiply it by the percentage of revenues that is coming from water stressed areas. So if a company generates 50% of its revenues in water stressed areas, we take 50% of the water consumption for our water footprint calculations. Also, this, of course, is not ideal because a company might be more efficient in a water stressed area than in other areas. But yeah, given the data availability that we have right now, and given the reporting of companies on their water consumption, it's almost never per facility. So this is basically the best we can get. And we use this water footprint as a flag to compare companies across peers and find outliers. So we use this information when we see that a company is considerably higher than peers, then we use this information in our screening, but also in our engagement. And we ask the companies, how can it be and what are they doing about it? So as I just mentioned, the main problem here is that many companies do not yet publish their water consumption, not on a per facility level, but also often companies do not publish their water consumption at all. So for a big part, the calculations are still, we still have to work with estimation and sector averages in there. So yeah, therefore we use this water footprint as a guidance, but in the screening of companies, we also look at their exposure to water risks and the management thereof. So we look at where is the main water usage of companies, what regions are they active in, and then on the other hand, how do they manage those risks? So do they have policies in place, programs in place? Do they have local targets? Do they what is, if available, the trend in their water consumption, etc. So we use as much as information as possible on those companies and their water management to get a good picture of what companies are actually doing. And then really we aim for this water neutral investment portfolio. So we select those companies in the portfolio that we think that could move towards this water neutrality, that are either on track or have the capacity and the willingness to get there in time. The companies that we do not see moving at all, that still consume a lot of water and do not have any intention to reduce this, we exclude. And then with the companies that are lagging in their management, but do show signs of of willingness and of improvement, with those companies we engage to try to get more progress and get this progress quicker. So that's for the water scarcity part. Then we also have the water quality part, and that's even more difficult because we do not have a footprint on water quality yet. We are currently working on an exercise to better estimate the company exposure to and management of water pollution and water quality. But in this, there is even less information than for water stress, because sometimes companies do report on their water discharges, but there are very little companies that report on the types of substances they use and the hazardous effects or potentially hazardous effects of their discharges. And then you would still have to map this with the vulnerability and the carrying capacity of the receiving water body. So that's still a work in progress for us. So yeah, we have set this target on water neutrality. We are screening and engaging companies on this target, but it's, to quantify it, it's still quite difficult. And that's also why we need and also support sector initiatives like the Valuing Water initiatives to increase the pressure upon companies to report adequately and to move forward in this game.
Great, thank you. I know we'll take a lot of lessons learned from you as we move forward with Valuing Water Finance Initiative. Definitely, you've done a lot of great, thoughtful work on this already. So speaking of what companies are doing, Madhu, I want to bring you into the conversation now. So I'm curious, how has the value of water been defined and internalized across different teams at the Coca-Cola Company? I would imagine, you know, the value of water stewardship may be more front and center for your team, but what about others across the company?
Absolutely. Thanks, Kirsten. Great question. Because I said before, water for us is a top business priority because it is the principal ingredients in the product we make and ingredients that we, in the agricultural products that we use in making our core products. So We use the size and the scale of our company to improve water security where water risks impact our business, our supply chain, and communities. So it's absolutely not restricted just for my team, but actually quite evolved across all our business and operating units. So I'll start by talking about how we approach water in our operations. We have a target, as I mentioned, for 3 pillars: operations, watersheds, and communities. So for the operations pillar, we have a target to get to 100% regenerative water use in all our leadership locations, which are our highest risk locations. And then the second target is to drive advanced water efficiency in improvements in all water stressed contexts. And like I said before, the third target we have is to continue to replenish at least 100% of the water we use in our finished beverages globally. So these are the 3 targets that really direct our operations and their approach. So for each of our operational facilities, we have analyzed water-related risks to prioritize facilities in 3 categories. So we have leadership locations, which are our highest risk locations. Then we have advanced efficiency locations, and we have contributing locations. And for each of these, we have context-based localized targets. We also, across all our operations across the world, we continue to adopt and implement our new Coca-Cola system water resource sustainability standard, which is aligned with the Alliance for Water Stewardship standard. Then when it comes to our communities, we seek to improve access to water and sanitation and strengthen community resilience in all our priority communities globally. And we have, as I mentioned before, a particular focus on women and girls. We've begun a process of mapping our priority communities, which is based on local context, but also looking at communities where we have an operational presence in that are commercial relevance to us, or where we source ingredients from, and underpinning all of that with a water risk lens, so that we can identify opportunities for where we want to be focused in. The third pillar of our strategy is watersheds. And that's where we are looking at watersheds that supply for water for our manufacturing facilities, or where our manufacturing facilities are located in, where we grow our global priority ingredients. And we are taking a holistic approach to watershed health, which goes beyond pure replenishment, but also looking at other components of watershed health. And based on this assessment of watershed health, we have a commitment to implement watershed stewardship plans in all our priority watersheds. Part of our work in this area also involves collaborating with our suppliers to engage farmers in their supply chains to promote advanced water management practices for all our global priority ingredients that are grown in water-stressed regions. So, similar to how the approach we've taken in our other strategic pillars of operations and communities, we are also in the process of mapping our priority ingredient sourcing regions and watersheds according to highest exposure to water risk. And ultimately, we will map and overlay all of these 3 categories to develop a holistic and integrated context-based approach. So as you can imagine, for this particular for the rollout of this strategy, it's all aspects of our operations and different teams cross-functionally that are involved.
Great, that's really helpful. And I'm wondering, how can we better leverage the role of external stakeholders, whether it's NGOs or investors like, those on the panel here today, or academics, in really demonstrating the value of water stewardship undertakings? How can we help a company like the Coca-Cola Company, continue to do this work and expand this work?
Yes, I'll give you a few examples of how we are working with NGOs and the civil society organizations who are a great partner in supporting not just us, but many companies like us in making progress on our work on water. So first of all, in terms of developing methodologies to quantify our work and assess progress, that's a key role that that the civil society organizations can help play. I'll give you an example. So about 10 years ago, we collaborated with the Nature Conservancy and WRI to create the volumetric water benefit accounting methodology, which helps create the volumetric benefits of the projects that that we support in terms of replenishment liters And this methodology has now become an industry standard and is used by peer companies. It was peer reviewed and now used by many companies as a methodology to measure the replenishment benefit of their projects. We are currently in discussions with a number of partners to develop a water quality benefit accounting methodology, because water quality is a key component as well. You can have lots of water, but if it's not of good quality, then that's an issue in itself. So we are in discussions to develop a water quality benefit accounting methodology to provide guidance on how do you identify shared water quality challenges, what sort of activities do you support for this, and what are the water quality indicators and methods that you can use as part of working on this issue. The third thing that I'd like to talk about is how do we work with the NGO partners and other peers in sort of looking at the social or societal benefits of water stewardship. That's an important component for us. So in 2018, the Coca-Cola Foundation partnered with a number of organizations to look at what was known as the ripple effect study, which quantified the impact that WASH improvements have on women's empowerment. And as a result of the study, ripple effect toolkit was launched, which guides companies on gender sensitive approaches to WASH. We, as a company, we drew on the learnings. Also, we draw on the learnings of our Replenish Africa initiative, which looks at replenishment work in Africa and has a strong gender component to it, to incorporate women's empowerment to it. And building on the back of these two pieces of work, we are now collaborating with WaterAid and Global Water Challenge and other peer companies to understand and measure gender-related outcomes of community WASH programs. And a study on this is being launched during World Water Week next week. So that's another way in which we've partnered with peer companies. A couple of other examples that I'll share is, again, when it comes to looking at the value of water, there's a lot of conversation on at the moment around nature-based solutions, and a lot of the work on water has co-benefits when it comes to nature-based solutions. So in Europe, we partnered with Denkstadt to develop a methodology that helps us quantify the co-benefits of nature-based solutions that we have as part of our project portfolio on water. And we've also worked with the Nature Conservancy and other companies, other organizations to pilot CEO Water Mandate NBS tool across more than 10 projects globally to better understand what the links between our water replenishment projects and nature-based solutions. The Nature-Based Solutions Benefits Explorer tool of CEO Water Mandate is already an open source resource that's available to all, but we are now collaborating. We're building on our partnerships to further collaborate with CEO Water Mandate, Denkstadt, and many other not-for-profit partners to help strengthen the business case for nature-based solutions by offering user insights into the kind of benefits these projects can have, to measure benefit accruals, help create a standardized methodology and a means to value social return on investment of nature-based solutions. Again, next week, you'll hear a bit more about our partnership with Blue Risk and some other peer companies where we partnered to conduct research on looking at societal impact of corporate water stewardship projects. And we are also working with WASH for Work, an initiative of CEO Water Mandate, to help develop a standardized methodology for accounting co-benefits of WASH projects and help strengthen the business case. So those are some of the examples. And then I'd like to just conclude by talking about collaborative and collective action platforms, where we are working with a number of collective action platforms to work with our peer companies. So we're a global member, a founding member of the 2030 Water Resources Group that supports collective action on water security across multiple companies and multiple actors. We also endorse the CEO Water Mandate's WASH for Work initiative that mobilizes business to improve access to WASH in their communities and supply chains. We work with the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative platform to look at the widespread adoption of sustainable agriculture initiative practices. And we're a founding member of their Regenerative Agricultural Initiative, where we are working with industry peers and suppliers to implement regenerative agriculture practices. So those are just some of the examples of how you can bring different stakeholders together as part of the solution, because the issues that we face on water scarcity are too big for any one company or any one sector to solve on their own, and certainly cross industry collaborative action is needed to work on some of these issues.
Yeah, that last point is really key. Partnerships are going to be critical to solve this crisis, and you have quite an impressive list there. So a lot to learn from. Thank you for sharing that. So in our last few minutes, I sort of want to bring us back to the Valuing Water Finance Initiative and turn to Belena and Nadia, who both organizations are members of and signatories to the Valuing Water Finance Initiative. So I'm curious and want to just ask you both in this short time before we turn to audience questions, what do you see as the value of this engagement, and what do you hope to achieve through your role in this initiative? And, Nadia, maybe you could draw from some of the engagements you've been involved in. You shared some earlier, but I know you've joined with Ceres on the global meat sourcing engagement, and you've had some notable engagements with the mining industries. So, can you just share a little bit on lessons learned and working with companies on these engagements, and how do you want to move forward working with the Valuing Water Initiative? So maybe Belena, I'll turn to you first, and then Nadia, I'll turn to you second.
Great. Thank you for that. So at the heart of the GPF, we understand the inherent interconnectedness of how water fits into every aspect of South African people's lives. And also we do subscribe to the Sustainable Development Goals. And, we understand that you cannot develop a country or a nation without life, which is essentially water. So the reasoning behind why we joined this initiative was to essentially understand our risks and also to be able to quantify that. As our other panelists mentioned, is that quantifying water is so incredibly difficult. And we understand at the GPF that, we want to understand what our water footprint is. Is there anything that we can do about it? How can we go about it? But the way to start that is by being able to quantify in rands and cents. What does it mean for our members? Can we hedge against these risks? How does that affect our asset liability modeling as well? So it's not just a pie in the sky hoping to do the right thing, but it's also, how does this affect the pension fund? And essentially at the end of the day, we want to protect the value of the fund, and of course meet the financial returns for our members and beneficiaries. And also lastly, just what type of world do we want to live in? What type of world do we want our members and pensioners to live in? And that is so pivotal in our thinking. Thanks.
Terrific. Those are really great points there. And now, Nadia, turning to you, any thoughts to add on?
I would completely echo that. And besides that, when looking at other initiatives, engagement initiatives on water that we have been involved in, I think there are 3 aspects to this Valuing Water initiative that are important and that could really help in establishing a common ground. It's like the teaching leadership role that the initiative can bring, it's standardization, and it's a collective force that enables investors to move, but also increases the pressures upon companies. Regarding this leadership teaching role, what I noted is that due to its localized nature, water is just really different from other sustainability topics like climate change. And therefore, companies and investors generally find it hard to act. Companies are used to setting one policy and the targets on group level, and this does not work anymore for water because you really need the locals to take into account the local situation. And what I've heard, it's really something that Coca-Cola has already been doing, and also other companies that are front runners. But it's what I hear back in engagement is that some companies that still are only looking at water for a short period, they are really struggling with this because they have to go really to all of the facilities and ideally even into the supply chain to see what is the local situation and what does this demand from us, what action should we take. So it's really a different mindset that is needed, and it also requires a more proactive stand because it doesn't require only a focus on your own company, but the total impact on a water body has to be taken into account. It's also other stakeholders that consume or pollute the water. It's the environment that needs a specific amount of water to thrive. It's the population, the local population that needs water. So it requires a view that is much broader than your own company, and that's also not really dictated by the government, given the low water prices and environment or governmental permits that do not always take into account the environmental limits of a certain local geography. So I think, yeah, this is something that there is so much to the topic that often companies and also investors do not know where to start, and they are paralyzed by everything they do not know. And I think this is a great role for the Valuing Water initiative to really build the spaces, to prioritize sectors, prioritize regions, actions, and to come up with like this common set of actions, questions like start at this and then continue and make it more complicated for yourself, but really just to get it going. And then besides providing grips on these unknowns, the initiative could also help in standardization. I think in the investor world, we have seen a similar initiative in the form of Climate Action 100+. And the biggest advantage that I see in this initiative is that it provides a standardized set of questions and approaches companies with one common message. So instead of 100 investors asking 100 different questions, it gives companies one way to act and one set of priorities. How should they measure risk? How should they measure impacts? What should they report? And it makes it much easier for companies to comply with these requests. So in the end, I think the initiatives can lower the burden for both companies and investors to participate, but also make the topic more accessible and thereby increasing the pressure upon companies and investors just to start doing something. And then after that, when we have started, when we have set the scene, to make it more complicated and further deep dive into the nitty-gritty, but at least then action is being taken instead of everybody being paralyzed and waiting until we know all of the details.
Yeah. Great. Well, I look forward to working with all of you and continuing to learn from you as we move forward with the Valuing Water Finance Initiative. So we have time just very briefly for a few audience questions that have come in, but I think they can be answered pretty briefly. So first, Madhu, turning to you, if you could just briefly share, how have investors been stakeholders in ESG and specifically water-related discussions at Coca-Cola to date? Have you noticed any trends in investor engagements around water? Any quick thoughts to share there?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said before, I mean, ESG priorities have always been embedded in our business and the way we work and guided by the purpose of our company itself, which is to refresh the world and make a difference. So I'd just like to say that ESG has been core to our agenda for a long time. But if you ask about trends, so across the board, we are seeing interest in ESG issues from a whole range of stakeholders, not just investors, and collaborating with these internal and external stakeholders, incorporating their insights and feedback are essential for us. So, we see that as something that challenges us to do more, and certainly the trends are there. But I think specifically to investors, I'd say we recognize the role of investors in being very critical in helping drive sustainable water use. And that's why the Coca-Cola Foundation has supported Ceres in the Valuing Water Finance Initiative with a view to drive investor leadership on valuing water. And we hope that through the project, investors will be recruited and more companies that operate or have a high water risk footprint will be engaged to value and act on water as a financial risk and help drive large-scale change to better protect our water systems. So, yeah, I guess those are final thoughts on that topic.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And then really quickly, before we turn to Hank to wrap up, just one other question. Turning to you, Belena, an audience member was curious if there's any specific data sources that GPF is using to make its assessments on water risk. I know Nadia named a few earlier, but any that you want to share with the audience?
I have to say that at this stage we aren't using any specific data sources. A lot of the data that we source is desktop research and also engagements with the companies, especially on the unlisted side, and also annual reports. Yeah, those are our data points. So it goes back to the standardization of reporting as well. Yeah.
Terrific. And I know through the Valuing Water Finance Initiative, we'll be working on, benchmarks, and hopefully that'll provide a lot of useful data and fill in some of those information gaps as well. Terrific. Well, I want to thank all of the panelists. Those have been really wonderful insights that you shared with us on the value of water in the finance sector and the private sector. So thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it over to Hank for some closing remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. And thanks so much to the great panel, Belena, Nadia, and Madhu, for giving us an immense overview of the great work you and your networks are already doing. I think we can learn a lot from the examples you were given. But I'm also, of course, challenged by some of the remarks you gave. And I think perhaps to summarize this in, I think what Nadia Madhu said in the last is that it's complex. It's very hard to, Belania said it, it's very complex to, for a company or a organization or a government or a community to be able to address risks and opportunities that come with valuing water. So you need help and guidance, and it can't come from government or a private sector. It has to come from a whole of society approach. And this is where you also said that the Valuing Waters initiative could really provide a space where those actors and sectors can come together and explore those best practices, see where there's opportunities for scaling and replication. But this also immediately leads to a massive challenge. It is 2022, not 1902, and we're way behind on the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I mean, as a concept, you could say, hey, what about the Sustainable Development Goals? But as a matter of fact, being behind on the goals means we lose lives and livelihoods and economies, by the millions or billions every year, and that is preventable. So the question is not only how can the Valuing Water Initiative help support the many best practices you provided, and thanks again for your leadership on that and the partnership, and thanks, Kirsten. Also to you, not only to Belania, Madhu, and Nadia, but also the work you've been doing. But at the same time, I'm challenged, knowing that when we talk about WASH, billions still lack access to water, sanitation, and hygiene. When we think about private sector, yes, they champion part of the SDG agenda, but as a whole of society approach, is still tough. When we think about finance, we don't take into account neither the risks nor the opportunity of this holistic approach when we think about sustainable development. So we single out still our challenges and single out opportunities to invest in, and therefore create a future that is still more vulnerable. IPCC report Climate Change and Land from 2019 is very clear. 99% 1% of global investment make us more unsustainable and increase climate change and make us more vulnerable. So we celebrate on the not even 1% of global investments where we see opportunity, but we lack the capacity globally to scale and replicate that 1%. So how can, and I know this is too late a question in the debate, but where do you see opportunities for mainstreaming, institutionalizing, scaling and replication? Because we can't stick to piloting and cherishing the best and better examples that come forward from the initiatives that you take. And I think this is where there is an opportunity through a Valuing Water initiative, because we bring public and private finance sector together, where we learn lessons and go deep. At the same time, have also the opportunity to come up with the recommendations how to institutionalize that learning within the private sector, within finance, within the sectors that really matter, agriculture, food, energy and beyond, urban and non-urban, and make sure that those lessons learned and that level of institutionalization, mainstreaming that, gets to a scaling and replication that does help us change course when it comes to investing in sustainable development and therefore investing in water. So that's the thing that comes out of this debate again, and thanks again for the amazing examples. How can next steps in valuing water change the way how we value water in a bigger context, and not only championing the initiatives that you have, learn from that, but how can we bring them to a scale that is different? And with that, it immediately brings me to next year's conference. Next year's UN 2023 conference is about commitment. It's not pledges. A pledge is a promise. A commitment is what you will do. So how can we go beyond this promise of scale and replication? And what is the commitment you can help us think of towards next year's conference? And who are the partners behind that, that will help us understand how to value water, how to mainstream value water for the public and private sector? And what are the triggers or levers we have to push and pull to make sure that that is actually happening? And I'm pretty sure this is the first of 3 debates. And my role now in the debate is not to ask you another question and give you the floor. I know I have to wrap this up, but I want to send you not home, but to the next sessions in Stockholm, World Water Week, on valuing water, to help us understand how we can actually move whatever you are doing to something that we could call mainstream and scale in such a way that it empowers governments, private sector and finance to really change course. And I don't have the answer to this, but I do know that we can only do this together. I also know that luckily for the UN 2023 Water Conference, the window is soon. And that means perhaps that opportunity of planning with a deadline might help us and therefore you get to a commitment and a roadmap to put on the agenda, put on the conference agenda for next year. So my call to you is get your act together, not as a judgment, but as a to enthusiasm to encourage you, and do this together also through the Valuing Water initiative, and make sure we know to put it on the agenda for next year. This is session 1, setting the context. Session 2 is about unveiling water pricing in practice, which will be on Monday, 29th of August at 9 a.m. Stockholm time. And session 3, wrapping it all together, is tying it together Monday 9th. I think that would be Monday 29th as well of August at 11 a.m. On site in Stockholm. It's complex, but it's also our best opportunity. If we look at valuing water, we know how it will trickle down across the full SDG agenda. And will encourage and empower partnerships across all of society. And I think this is what the Valuing Water initiatives makes unique. It is a safe space, a soft space, where those sectors, you know, in a society of contested vested interest that is increasing a gap and therefore a possible distrust in society, can bring together. And those lessons learned and those practices that are real can be scaled and replicated and hopefully lead to mainstreaming the better practices that we need. Thank you again, Iris, for leading this initiative and leading us into the discussion. Thank you, Kirsten, for not only presenting the great work Ceres is already doing and the leadership you do within the initiative and in the world, but also for moderating the discussion. And thanks, Belaina, Madhu, and Nadja for an amazing discussion. And thank you, team of the Valuing Water initiative here at Stockholm. Many partners are actually part of this seminar, and too many perhaps to mention, and I'm not sure. I did not make notes here, but it is the Valuing Water initiative, it is the World Bank, it is the OECD, it is the World Wildlife Fund, it is Ceres, it is CDP, it is of course SIWI itself, so there are more. So I really hope this can work towards the next event, Monday next week. Thanks again, and look forward to see you in Stockholm.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henk, for your moderation.
Well, it was actually Kirsten who moderated.